Welcome to Guerrilla Radio on CFUV 101.9 FM, 104.3 on the cable dial, and we're heard around the world in Shoutcast at cfuv.uvic.ca. Well, welcome back to your busy schedule after the holiday break. The winter break is an interesting one for those following the political doings of the state and its sponsors in the corporate sphere. It is a time favored by those plotting legal mischief to introduce and pass legislation quietly while the people are distracted. And so it was on a snowy night in December while sugar plum fancies filled Canadian heads. The nation's Senate gave final approval of Bill C36, effectively allowing the dismantling of nearly 8 centuries of English jurisprudence. Canadians are no longer protected by the Magna Carta, that set of laws tyrant King John was forced by an outraged people to sign so long ago. What the new government of Canada has wrought through Bill C36, with support from all parties in the House, by the way, is the birth of a new dark age, the beginnings of a new age of tyranny. Shawn Buckley is a constitutional lawyer with special expertise in the Food and Drug Act and regulations of Canada. He has taken up the mantle for natural health products manufacturers and has beaten back Health Canada's relentless efforts to encroach upon the right of Canadians to access alternatives to Big Pharma's near healthcare monopoly. Buckley toured Canada with the Natural Health Products Protection Association last year in a final-ditch effort to educate Canadians about the risk posed by C36, with the hope the citizenry would pressure this to soberly reconsider the negative effects of this odious bill and stop its passage. Shawn Buckley on Bill C36, the epitaph for Canadian freedom, in the first half. Well, welcome to the program, Shawn.
Well, thank you. Glad to be here.
Well, my pleasure, of course. Now, Shawn, I'd like to begin with a preview of Bill C36 in action. The case of the Courtenay, BC's Marigold Natural Pharmacy was a shocker last year, even before C36 came into full effect. Now, how is this case emblematic, if it is, of all you and the NHPPA have warned Canadians against?
Well, basically, I'll tell your listeners what happened with Marigold, but basically it's an example of how the state can sweep in and without court supervision endanger your livelihood and also put patients of natural practitioners at risk. And in fact, it's the risk part that is the most troubling. Now, basically what happened with Marigold is that a Health Canada inspector turned up with a College of Pharmacy inspector and just kind of poked around. Then a week later, a budget rental truck pulls up in front of the pharmacy, and I think it was 3 or 4 Health Canada inspectors get out and basically spend the entire loading up this rented truck with products that this compounding pharmacy makes in small batches, so that people like naturopathic doctors and that, their patients can fulfill prescriptions that are written. So, and my understanding, if I recall correctly from speaking with Marigold, is their costs, so not the retail value, but their cost of the seized products was about $140,000. Now, there aren't a lot of businesses that can take hits like that and survive. And then the frustrating thing is that people who were relying on these treatments didn't have access to them. And Health Canada, when it does this, never takes into account the health consequences of taking these treatments away. And the inspectors doing this are not trained in health matters, but in effect they are second-guessing your naturopathic doctors, your homeopathic doctors, your traditional Chinese practitioners, your nutritionists. These are people that train. Some of them just have decades and decades of experience and are highly qualified, and yet you'll have some inspector without any health training basically endangering people's health.
Well, so what are their marching orders then? I mean, they cased this place out, as you mentioned. They went in there and they saw what they thought to be infractions of the Health Canada Code. What infractions are those? And is this was the Marigold Natural Pharmacy? Were they breaking the law?
Well, that's actually a great question for Marigold, and don't let me, finish without telling you that most health food stores are breaking the law. But, and if we backed up to 2004, the whole natural health industry was breaking the law and completely illegal. It's basically never been regulated. So what we had is we had just a brief history of how Canada has gone about this, is we had the Food and Drug Act, and we had drug regulations that were written for chemical pharmaceutical drugs. So if some company creates something that's never been in the human body, a novel chemical, that's the type of thing it was to regulate. Natural health products were basically unregulated, and they couldn't comply with these regulations that were drafted for novel chemicals. And it's funny, actually, I think it was around 91, 92, Health Canada had one of the few labs, and probably the best lab, for taking a natural health product and trying to figure out if there was a danger or not. And they closed that lab. It was run by a Dr. Dennis Awang, who's still in the Lower Mainland, as I understand it. And it was closed because Health Canada did not view natural health products as creating enough of a risk to justify the cost of the lab. And they were absolutely correct. There's never been a documented death in Canadian history caused by a natural health product. And anyone who's ever looked at it, they can't find a risk to justify the cost of an expensive lab like that. In fact, the same products in the United States, they had a citizen rebellion, and in 1994, their Congress and Senate passed the Deshay legislation, which deems these products by law to be safe because they just simply are not causing adverse reactions and not causing death. So we're dealing with a group of products that are excessively safe that have never been regulated until 2004 in Canada. So it's funny, we have the same citizen rebellion the United States has, and the message was the same. We want increased access. Now, we had this rebellion because Health Canada started to use the chemical drug regulations to restrict our access, and people rebelled. But the exact opposite thing happened in Canada as in the United States. Same message, give us increased access. In the United States, they deem them to be foods. They're presumed by law to be safe, and the FDA, which is the U.S. equivalent of Health Canada, cannot take one off the market unless the FDA has evidence of harm. But we do the opposite. So here the Canadian citizens demand increased access, and instead of treating them as foods like they are in the United States, we deem them to be dangerous drugs. Instead of presuming them to be safe, we presume them to be unsafe, and we presume them to be fraudulent. We actually went a step further than being opposite of the states. And so basically we had this thriving marketplace up until 2004. No one was getting injured. And Health Canada comes out with these regulations that are going to take about 2/3 of the products off of the market, maybe 3/4 of the products we had access to before. Now the frustrating thing about this is Health Canada has not done a single risk analysis to show that these regulations are justified, and even more scary, they haven't done a single risk analysis to show the danger of taking products successfully using to treat serious conditions away from them and forcing them into the chemical pharmaceutical model, which carries a very high risk. So what we're doing isn't about safety, but back to your question about the legality, I just wanted your listeners to know that if they walked into a health food store today, probably half of the products are illegal. Last year, probably 75% were illegal. And any year before that, probably 100% were illegal. So when we talk about illegal, it creates a pejorative feeling in our minds. So I think it's helpful for your listeners to know, well, basically they've always all been illegal, and it's the exception for them to be legal. Now we're going to end up with fewer products that are legal. So we'll have legal products only, and we'll have lost about 3/4 of what we had access to before. Well, we will have no innovation. But with Marigold, I'm not sure they were breaking the law. Health Canada were seizing small batches of compounded products. You don't have to get licenses for compounded products. So let's say you go to a naturopathic doctor. He or she can compound for you, and they don't have to comply with these natural health product regulations, where you have to get a license, both a site license or product license. There's some ambiguity in the law when you're something like Marigold and you're just compounding, very small batches for these doctors. So I'm not sure Marigold was actually breaking the law. At the end of the day, the complaint may have been, but we don't know because Health Canada has not started court proceedings, even though they've held these products for roughly 7 months. So at the end of the day, the complaint may be, well, maybe they didn't have something like an expiry date or whatever, which is actually the norm in a lot of compounded products. But we're not sure. But it's an example. So the state goes and seizes this. They do not start court proceedings. They do not have court permission to hold this property. They did not have a search warrant. They're claiming to use part of the Food and Drug Act, which purports to authorize these seizures. But that section was declared unconstitutional by the federal court years ago in a case called C.E. Jameson, and it's presently in front of the Federal Court of Appeal on the same issue. Is it constitutional or not?
Would that be Jameson?
So it's likely the legal, or the seizure itself is illegal.
Well, I mean, I've got a few points here now. Would that be Jameson, the manufacturer that you cited?
Yeah, like long ago. I mean, the C. Jameson case, I believe, is a 1984 case. So we're talking quite some time ago. But yeah, they had run into a problem where basically, if I recall correctly, it was amino acids, and Health Canada was treating them as new drugs and went in and seized without a warrant. And the federal court trial division declared that section of the Food and Drug Act, which allowed warrantless seizures, unconstitutional. Well, in fact, in my opinion, that court decision was rightly decided.
Well, this sounds like a perversion of the precautionary principle to me. But what about the doctors that prescribe these elements and the people who have them, who take them or use them and have them in their homes? Are they, now that Bill C-36 is in force, are they criminals too? Well, now, we have to draw a distinction between what happened with Marigold and Bill C-36. Mm-hmm. Because Bill C-36 is the Canada Consumer Product Safety Act. It does not cover food and drugs. So it doesn't mean that it's not a problem with regards to food and drugs, but Bill C-36 does not cover food and drugs. Why my organization, the Natural Health Product Protection Association, was concerned with Bill C-36 is really twofold. First of all, the bill moves us into full police state mode. And I'm actually mincing my words. I could say worse, but we'll just leave it at we are now in a police state with regards to consumer products where we do not have the rule of law, and the state can basically take control over private property without court supervision. The problem with regards to food and drugs is when Bill C-36 was first introduced, it was actually 2 parliaments ago. And it was introduced as the sister bill to Bill C-51. And probably some of your listeners will remember Bill C-51 because there was just an absolute citizen rebellion against Bill C-51, which was going to basically abolish the rule of law in the area of food and drugs. So it would allow the state to absolutely destroy pharmacies like Marigold Pharmacy, which compounds for natural practitioners. It would allow the state to absolutely destroy your practitioners, your manufacturers, your distributors, without ever involving a court. You see, whereas now if the state wants to go after you for violating any of the regulations, it's supervised by court. And in theory, the seizure of your property should be supervised by the court, although in a case like Marigold, the state is acting without court supervision. So, but just so that I'm clear, Bill C-36, although really problematic, doesn't come into play with regards to Marigold. Okay. So what does it mean then? What does it mean for, as I said in the introduction, the overturning of the rule of law? This is C-36 I'm referring to. Does this, I mean, the way I understand it, and I'm looking at an article on the NHPPA's .org, its website, an article written and published in the Windsor Star, that, you know, it seems to say to me that if Health Canada and whoever agencies they'd like to include with them decide that I might have some illicit vitamin C or something, they can just come into my house and start poking around without the need of any kind of search warrant. Am I correct in that?
You're correct on everything except vitamin C. And
okay,
so
vitamin D.
Let me just fill in your listeners of what some of the absolutely scary parts of Bill C-36 are. And when I say things like, well, Bill C36 undermines the rule of law, some people don't even understand, well, what is the rule of law? Why should I care about something like that? And quite simply, the rule of law is simply the principle that before the state can take control over you personally, either to kill you or imprison you, or before the state can take control over your property, they have to be supervised by an independent court. And to imagine how important this is, just go back in time with me in your imagination to medieval times. You're back in a feudal society before the rule of law. If the state wanted to kill or imprison you, the soldiers just came out of the castle, and they did their duty. If the state wanted your property, the soldiers just came out of the castle and took your property. And I imagine people learned not to resist because you would just simply get killed. Now, you do not have to use your imagination to appreciate how unsatisfactory that is for the average citizen, and actually how absolutely dangerous it is. Anytime the state can take your property without independent action, you're in a situation where the state can just arbitrarily and in the state's discretion just destroy you. So, I'm a lawyer, but I just practice for myself. If the state could come in and seize all of my office equipment and all of my files and tell me I can't practice law anymore and not involve a court, they could absolutely destroy me and put my family on the street, and there's no court supervision. That's tyranny. If you go and you just grab a dictionary, everyone's got a dictionary at home, look up the definition of tyranny, that's just a situation where the state can use its absolute discretion, and it isn't supervised by independent courts. That's why we have independent courts, as it reins in the state's exercise of discretion. What Bill C36 does, if you are in the business of making, designing, selling, advertising, storing, shipping consumer products, which covers almost all of our economy, the state now can take control over your business, can take control of your bank accounts, your stock, everything, without ever involving a court. So you could be running a retail store, Health Canada inspector could walk in there. They don't even have to believe you're committing an offense. They can just be checking for compliance. They can seize your whole outfit. They can make binding orders. They're not court orders. They just can make orders themselves, saying, well, move this, do that, controlling your property without involving a court. Literally, state agents, if you're in the area of consumer products and your livelihood depends on it, you are now at the total whim of the state. We no longer have the rule of law. They can go to court if they want, but they don't have to. It's an absolute dangerous place to be, and this is just the first example. So we know that other laws will be passed because the state's never satisfied. So we've now undermined the rule of law in a large part of our economy, and it's just a matter of time before it's undermined in all of the areas of our lives. I could talk about the law of trespass. Trespass has been a fundamental right and privilege that we inherited as Canadians because we were a British colony and we got their common law. Our right to private enjoyment of our property is so sacrosanct, according to our legal traditions, that if somebody comes on your property, including a police officer, and they don't have your permission to be there, or they don't have a court order like a search warrant saying they can be there, and you tell them to leave, and they can be charged criminally, or you can sue them civilly, and it's the only tort where you don't actually have to show you were damaged. The court just assumes you were damaged because you had the right to private enjoyment of your property, and it was destroyed. So the police could be investigating a terrorist plot involving a nuclear weapon or a first-degree murder, and when you tell them to leave your property, they have to leave. But now, under this new law, Health Canada inspectors investigating the safety of consumer products or just simply the compliance with their regulations, they can be on your property. They can be anywhere but your home. They can go into any other building other than your home without a warrant. They can go into your garage. They can go into your shed. They can go into your business. Anywhere but your home. They can be in your backyard. They can be in your flower garden. You tell them to leave, they don't have to leave. So Whereas you and I grew up with the understanding that the state can't come onto our private property without court permission, our children will grow up in a Canada where no, it's normal, and you can't tell state agents to leave. It kind of begs the question. I mean, when the regular police can't be on your property without your permission, have consumer products become so dangerous in Canada that all of a sudden we have to give up fundamental rights and freedoms to protect ourselves from consumer products? I would say the opposite's happening, that we've just passed a law that has put us in danger, that whenever you undermine the rule of law, whenever you allow the state to act with absolute discretion, whenever you say that, well, let's abolish things like the rule of trespass, you're actually endangering us.
Well, Shawn, I mean, they used to say justice delayed is justice denied. It's been, in the case of Marigold, it's been almost 7 months now since their pharmacist, Rudy Sanchez, lost all of his inventory. I don't know what he's doing now, but as you say, they haven't even moved. Health Canada has yet to even move to start proceedings to say whether he can have his stuff back, or whether he was breaking a law or anything like that, or get financial recourse for his loss. In the minute or so we have left, Shawn, what's the next step now for both Rudy Sanchez and the other pharmacists around the country who are afraid of this, and for the people who are worried, rightly so, about their loss of liberty because of Bill C36?
Well, it is interesting. First of all, step one for everyone is, because I have to tell you, even a couple of years ago, I couldn't have believed that we could have passed legislation like this. And I wouldn't have believed that the state would be taking away tens of thousands of products that people are successfully managing health conditions for without any risk analysis at all, and without any understanding they were, trampling on fundamental rights, but also putting people at risk. So first of all, people have to wake up and understand the game has changed. The state is maneuvering itself to have absolute control over what you do with your body, both what you eat and how you treat yourself when you're sick. The organization that I'm a part of, the Natural Health Products Protection Association, I'll give the website for your listeners, www.nhppa.org. We're actually in the process of putting together an accountability initiative, because we think that both the politicians and the bureaucrats involved in this have to start being held accountable. And if people don't have a peaceful mechanism through which to voice discontent and through which to try and exercise their rights, we think things are going to get very problematic. So it is time for people to absolutely wake up, pay attention to what's going on, and start advocating for the few rights you have left, or you will not have rights. And we are creating a Canada for our children that our parents would not have tolerated.
Well, okay, Shawn Buckley, well, thanks a lot. Now, remember, if you want to find out more about this, nhppa.org, you can find links to that at my website, pacificfreepress.com as well. Thanks a lot, Shawn, for coming on.
Thanks a lot for having me, Chris.
Well, it's my great pleasure, of course. Now, I'm going to take a brief break, but when I come back, I'm going to be joined by